Okay, so I've said that a narrative is built up of points, okay? And the more organized these points are, the better you're going to get this thing called flow within your narrative. So it's all about the organization of the points. The idea, as I want you to look at it, is to bring order to the chaos of your thoughts. So let's stick with the Star Wars example that we just started with. And the first thing to notice in your list of points, or in my list of points, is how some points are more related to each other than others, right? There are some points that you kind of elaborate on, like you might say something about a character and then elaborate on that a little bit. Then you might illustrate it, say, with illustrate your point with an example from the movie. Or you might get points that even challenge some of your points that you made. So just notice the different nature of points that you make, point, illustration, elaboration, challenge. These are kind of the main categories of points. And they sort of, some points belong together and they form a little family. So for example, this might be a family. Characters were well-rounded. That's one point. Most characters grew into something different by the end. The film's characters were more engaging than those in the original Star Wars film. Han Solo goes from being unconcerned about his family to being deeply committed. Rey's character was underdeveloped. There was no real character arc. So what's the common theme of all these points? That's right, they are all to do with character, right? So, and character is an aspect of a movie, a very important aspect that many people recognize. And so you can now begin to think of these points as falling into sections, right? So if you wanted to create a section out of characters, you now have a kind of an organizational methodology, a principle to begin organizing these points into sections. And that becomes a section of the overall narrative. So we want to now begin doing a couple of things. We want to organize the points within each section in an elegant way, so that we're moving between the points in the character section in a way that is neat and tidy and meaningful. But we can also look at the way that the sections relate to each other. We're going to order the sections in a way that's meaningful. So here I'm going deeper than I did in writing with flair about narrative elegance. But I hope you can see it now with this very concrete example of a long narrative. Now, let's just zoom in on the character section here. Let's say you've jotted down these points about character in this order. Rey's character is underdeveloped, no arc. That's 1. 2, Han Solo goes from being unconcerned about his family to being deeply committed. 3, characters were well-rounded. 4, film's characters more engaging than in the original. 5, most characters grew into something different by the end. Now, if you didn't change that order and just kept it as it was, the final write-up of that material, of that section, might look something like this. Rey's character, played by Daisy Ridley, was woefully underdeveloped, without any clear evolutionary arc. Harrison Ford's character, Han Solo, however, progresses more convincingly, going from being unconcerned about his oddball family to becoming deeply committed. The characters overall were well-rounded. They were also more engaging than those in the original Star Wars movie. Most grew into something different by the end. Now, you might look at that and say, okay, that's okay on one level. I've made the series of points about character in the order that I had them. I've made it work, with this sentence structure. But it's not necessarily the most elegant ordering of the points, and that's what I want you to begin to become sensitive to. You should be playing around with these points, this list of points in that section, and saying, well, which one would follow better from the other? Which one would make it more readable, more interesting, more organized? So play around to get optimum comprehension and optimum beauty. Now, just as an exercise, try and do that with the 5 points that I've given you there, and rearrange them and in the way that you think, and then turn that into a piece of writing, and then I'll show you how I might do it. Okay, so if you've done that, here's how I would have organized it differently to give it a slightly different feel. The film's characters were pretty well rounded, with most growing into someone different by the end. Harrison Ford's character, Han Solo, evolves from being completely unconcerned about his oddball family to becoming deeply committed. However, the character Rey, played by Daisy Ridley, was woefully underdeveloped with no clear evolutionary arc. That said, overall, the characters were more engaging than those in the original Star Wars. So if we want to break that down, the film's characters were pretty well-rounded. That's a general point about characters, with most growing into something different by the end. That kind of elaborates on that point. Harrison Ford's character evolves from being completely unconcerned about his family to being deeply committed. So this is an illustration of the first point about the roundedness of the characters. However, the character Rey, played by Daisy Ridley, was woefully underdeveloped with no clear evolutionary arc. So this challenges the first point. So I've made the first point, elaborated, illustrated, and then challenged. That said, overall, the characters were more engaging than in the original Star Wars. So that makes a new but related point within the character section. So this is what we call weaving points together. So this is what I want you to begin to think about. Instead of just bashing them out in the order that they came out of your head, we're now giving them a more considered feel. Now, you may prefer the first version for some reason. There's no sort of major right or wrong, but this is something that you need to have the power to play around with. You have the power to decide now how you want to build out that narrative. Character is, of course, just one of the sections in this narrative. What else is there? What else is there apart from character? We've mentioned things about the plot. We've mentioned things about dialogue. We've mentioned things about pace. Now, these are all different aspects of the film that we're reviewing, so you can begin to organize the sections now. Which should go first? Character, plot, dialogue, pace, special effects. What organization of those sections feels nice to you? And this kind of, there's many different ways. You might want to look at it like character first, then dialogue, then plot, then pace, then special effects. And that kind of say character and dialogue are a bit closer together because they're about the people. The plot, the pace, and the effects, getting a bit more technical. So maybe you want to go from the people to the technical. So, it's taking this step back now and beginning to organize the sections. So we have, I hope you notice, an organizing principle here where, our sections are based around different aspects of the film, okay? We're organizing the narrative around themes in this particular instance, plot, character, dialogue. But it's not the only organizing principle that you can have with this particular material. Can you think of any other types of organizational principles other than the sort of different aspects of the film? You could break it down, for example, into things I liked and things I didn't like. Okay, so now the organizing principle of that narrative is things I like, things I don't like. And that way you can begin to talk first about one thing and then talk about the other thing. And within each of those categories, you might be saying things about plot, character, and so on, and then plot, character, and special effects, and so on, depending on how it falls, the good and bad of each part. But I just want you to see that there's different ways you can begin to organize the narrative. What was good? Characterization I liked, dialogue I liked, special effects I liked, and then what was bad? The rehashed plot, the confusing in parts, the poor development of key characters. So you start to see that the material begins to be organized differently. And let's take one of those points, confusing in parts. Now, under the original design, that might just fall into the plot section. The plot was confusing. Now, in the new paradigm, different aspects of the plot would fall into the good or bad breakdown. So I hope you can begin to see that really clearly now. I'm trying to stress that for you. The two reviews would organize your points completely differently. Now, if you feel, how do you decide which of these organizing principles to use? I mean, it's really up to you. It depends on your feeling about what you want to say. So if you find that, the fact that you loved it or the fact that you hated it was so compelling to you, then that might be the best way to go, rather than saying, okay, a more informative approach of here's what the plot did and here's it takes on a more of an emotional feel to it. So look at your feeling that underlies what you want to say. Again, your intent, and then you can choose which of the organizing principles works better. Okay, and now with this level of organization, of narrative, your piece starts to have a very considered feel, and it loses its randomness, okay? And this is what it's all about. This is what we mean by a flowing narrative. And I hope you can see that this is really where some of the hardest work is done, you know, because this is the analysis. You're really putting together the organization of the points, and that is one of the hardest things, and this is why a lot of writing falls flat, because people don't get this. Now, when you do this, there's another advantage, that you begin to see, you know, where you're repeating things and so on, so you can now see, well, that point is a bit too close to that point, I'm kind of saying the same thing, and you'll be able to now edit down what you've got. So if you apply this process, I think you're going to find that it's super helpful in understanding what to say and how to say it. If you want to get some practice in, you know, have a go at writing a review of a film you saw recently. Choose your narrative organizing principle, and see if you can now get your message across more comprehensively and more beautifully than you could before watching this lecture.